The thing about deep space research was that nobody talked about the silence. They talked about the danger. They talked about the isolation pay, the career opportunities, the chance to be the first human hands to touch soil on a world nobody had named yet. Recruiters loved that part. They put it in brochures. First human hands. Like it was romantic. Nobody put in the brochure that you would eat the same 4 meal packs on a rotating schedule for 11 months. Nobody mentioned that the comms delay back to Earth was long enough that any conversation you started felt like shouting into a well and waiting 3 weeks for an echo. Nobody told Ray Calloway that the silence of Varda Station had a specific quality, not peaceful, not threatening, just present, like a large animal sitting in the corner of every room he walked into. Ray had been on Varda Station for 14 months. He had 14 more to go. He didn't mind. That was the honest truth, and he knew it made him strange. Most researchers requested transfers by month 8. The ones who stayed past a year were either very dedicated or had quietly run out of places they particularly wanted to be instead. Ray was both. He was 34 years old. He had a doctorate in xenobiology, 2 published papers that 6 people had read, and a houseplant named Gerald that he had carried in a climate pod all the way from his last posting on Harith Colony. Gerald was a succulent. Gerald required almost nothing. Ray had chosen him specifically for this reason and felt no irony about it at all. He came back from the outer biodome on a Tuesday, or what the station clock called Tuesday, which had no relationship to any actual Tuesday anywhere. He'd been out for 6 hours collecting microbial samples from the atmospheric filter vents, which was as unglamorous as it sounded. The samples would be logged, sealed, and shipped to a lab on New Helsinki in roughly 4 months, where someone else would do the interesting part. Ray's job was to collect, label, and not contaminate anything. He was good at it. He came through the cargo bay airlock, pulled off his outer suit, and stowed his collection kit in the rack by the door. The bay was mostly empty at this hour. A few automated loaders moving supply crates from a freighter that had docked that morning. The lights were low. It smelled like machine oil and recycled air, which was the smell of every cargo bay on every station Ray had ever worked on, which was 5. He picked up his equipment case and started toward the corridor. He made it about 4 steps before he noticed it. There was something under the lip of the crate nearest the airlock. Not a shadow. He'd thought it was a shadow at first, the way a fold of dark material might pool in a corner. But it moved, just slightly. A small shift, like a breathing thing trying to make itself smaller. Ray stopped walking. He set down his equipment case. He crouched. The thing that looked back at him was roughly the size of a large house cat, though shaped like nothing that had ever lived on Earth. It was scaled, dark, almost blue-black, with a ridge of translucent frills folded flat against its skull and down the back of its neck. Its body was compact and coiled in on itself, wings pressed tight, tail curled under. Its eyes were enormous. They caught the low cargo bay light and held it, 2 pale amber coins staring at him with an expression that was, somehow, completely legible. It was scared, and it had decided, for reasons Ray could not begin to guess, that he was the safest thing in the room. Ray had been a xenobiologist for 10 years. He knew better than to make sudden movements near unknown fauna. He held very still. The creature did not run. It pressed itself slightly more forward, frills trembling. "Hey," Ray said quietly. "Okay, you're okay." He looked around the cargo bay. No one. The automated loaders continued their indifferent circuits. Whatever this thing was, it had come in on the freighter, probably clinging to the underside of a crate, which explained the position. It was thin. The scales around its neck had a dull, almost papery quality that Ray recognized from his field work, an animal that hadn't been eating enough. He reached slowly into the side pocket of his equipment case. He had 2 ration bars in there, the dense ones, high protein, that he ate during long surveys because they didn't require heating. He broke one in half. He held it out. The creature stared at it. Then it lurched forward, snatched the bar from his hand with a speed that made him flinch, and retreated 3 inches to eat it in about 4 seconds. Ray watched it eat. "Right," he said. "So." He stood up. He picked up his equipment case. He walked to the corridor door and pressed the panel. The door slid open. He walked through it. Behind him, he heard small claws on the floor. He turned around. The creature was following him. It moved with a slight hitch in its left foreleg. Injured, Not badly, but enough to make its gait uneven. It stopped when he stopped. It sat. It looked at him. Ray pointed back toward the cargo bay. The creature did not move. He walked a few steps back toward the cargo bay. The creature watched. He made a broad gesture in the direction of the freighter dock. The creature blinked its enormous amber eyes. Ray turned around and continued to his quarters. The sound of small claws followed him the entire way. He put food near the junction at the end of his corridor, the second half of the ration bar, placed deliberately on the floor outside the door to the maintenance corridor, hoping the creature would find it and wander off into the station's broader infrastructure. He went inside. He locked his door. In the morning, the food was gone. The creature was sitting outside his door. He tried the box approach next. He found a ventilated storage crate, lined it with a spare thermal blanket, placed it near the environmental shaft on level 3 where the air ran warm. He put the rest of his ration bars inside it. He even rigged a slow-release water line. On the second morning, the creature was asleep on his chest. He lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling. The creature made a sound, a low, pulsing hum, not quite a purr, more like a signal. Something regular. Something that felt, in a way Ray couldn't explain and wouldn't have admitted to anyone, like being told, "I checked. You're safe. I checked and you're safe." He named it Pip, because the sound it made was exactly like a distress beacon. Short, clear, repeating. That evening, he pulled up the xenobiology archive on his work terminal and began searching the species database for scaled, winged, psychically inclined fauna with translucent neck frills. It took him about 8 minutes to find it. He stared at the result for a long time. Vorthan, ancient species, deep space origin, one of the 12 founding members of the Galactic Compact, highly intelligent, psychically bonded social structure, sacred cultural hierarchy, lifespans measured in centuries. He scrolled down. Hatchling bonding, a rare, irreversible psychic event in which a young Vorthan selects a guardian. The bond is considered sacred and inviolable under Vorthan cultural law. Unauthorized possession of a bonded Vorthan hatchling constitutes a diplomatic incident under Compact Article 7. Ray read that line twice. He looked at Pip. Pip was curled against Gerald's pot, frills half raised, watching him with those enormous amber eyes. He looked back at the screen. He scrolled further. He read the words, irreversible, sacred, diplomatic incident, punishable. He closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of his quarters for a while. The station hummed around him. Pip made her small beacon sound. Ray slowly reached under his bunk and slid the laptop out of sight. Then he got up, made himself a cup of water, the heating coil was broken again, and stood at the viewport for a long time, watching the stars. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't really have anywhere else to be. Hiding a Vorthan hatchling on a space station turned out to be, in Ray's estimation, roughly as difficult as hiding a small fire. Pip did not cooperate with being hidden. This was not out of malice. He was fairly sure about that, but simply because Pip had no concept of the problem. She had decided that Ray was her person. Ray went places. Therefore, Pip went to those places. The logic, from her perspective, was airtight. From Ray's perspective, it was a series of near disasters. The first week, he kept her in the equipment bag, the big one, with the mesh side panels meant for air circulation in sensitive sample containers. She fit. Barely. She did not enjoy it, but she tolerated it, pressing her snout against the mesh and watching the world go by with an expression of patient resignation that Ray found both endearing and exhausting. The second week, she figured out the zip. He came back from a water reclamation survey to find her sitting on top of his open bag in the middle of the corridor, frills raised, tail wrapped neatly around her feet, watching a Thalvan maintenance worker stare at her from 10 meters away. The worker, a stocky, four-armed individual named Breck who Ray had exchanged exactly 11 words within 14 months, looked from Pip to Ray. Ray picked Pip up, tucked her under his arm, and kept walking. Breck said nothing. Ray made a note to bring Breck an extra ration pack the next time supplies came in. The third week, he tried the gear locker on sublevel 4. It was large, well ventilated, and in a part of the station that nobody visited except to swap out filter units every 2 months. He set up a water line, a feeding dish, a folded blanket. He explained to Pip, quietly and clearly, that this was a temporary arrangement. Pip listened with every appearance of understanding. She waited until he was gone, then scratched at the locker door for 4 hours straight until a passing technician heard it, opened it, and found a small-scaled creature who immediately sat down and stared at her with enormous amber eyes. The technician, to her credit, simply closed the locker, kept walking, and told no one. Ray never found out who she was. He was grateful. By the end of week 3, Ray had become very good at moving through the station with Pip inside his jacket. She was small enough, still, that the bulk wasn't too obvious if he kept his jacket sealed. She had learned, or decided, to stay still when he was in populated areas, only shifting when she needed to adjust her position. She was warm against his ribs. He had stopped noticing this, mostly. He told himself he had stopped noticing this. The market level on Deck 7 was where it fell apart. He was buying protein supplements. Pip needed more calcium than his regular ration packs provided, a fact he had determined through 3 days of careful cross-referencing between Vorthan dietary literature and the station's supply manifest. He was reaching for a container on the upper shelf when Pip shifted, pushed her head out from below his jacket hem to look at a display of colorful supply pouches, and her tail, which had been carefully tucked, dropped out and hung in open air for about 4 full seconds. The vendor, a compact Urani woman with excellent eyesight, saw it. She looked at the tail. She looked at Ray. She looked at the tail again. Ray very calmly paid for the supplements and left. He was in his quarters for approximately 1 hour before his comm unit chimed with a request from Commander Eula's office. Eula's office was on Deck 2, which was the deck where things were official and serious. It had better lighting than the rest of the station and smelled less like recycled air. Eula herself was Thalvin, broad-shouldered, with smooth gray-green skin and the particular quality of stillness that Ray had noticed in long-serving commanders across 3 species. She was sitting behind her desk when he arrived, and she looked at him the way someone looks at a minor headache they had hoped would resolve on its own. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. "I've had 3 reports," she said. A worker on level 3, a technician on sub-level for who apparently decided it wasn't her problem, and now the Deck 7 market. I want to be clear that I did not go looking for these reports. They came to me. Ray said nothing. Eula looked at his jacket. "Is it in there now?" Ray opened his jacket. Pip looked out at Eula with her amber eyes and her frills half raised, the relaxed position Ray had learned. Not threatened. Curious. Ray said. "And yes, she's eating better now." Another silence. Eula folded her hands on the desk. "Do you understand what you have done?" "Yes." "Do you understand what the Vorthan Dominion will do if they find out?" "I've read Article 7. And?" Ray looked at her steadily. "The bond is irreversible. I've read their own literature." She chose. "You can't undo a completed Vorthan bond without damaging the hatchling's cognition. It says so, in their own sacred texts." Eula stared at him. Then she exhaled slowly through her nose, which was the Thalvin equivalent of a very long and complicated sigh. She opened a desk drawer, took out a nutrition supplement packet, the high-density kind used for injured fauna during station rescues, and placed it on the desk. "I did not see that hatchling," she said. "I have not received any formal reports. If you continue to manage this situation quietly and without creating a diplomatic incident on my station, I will continue to not see it. The supplements are logged as spoilage prevention test samples. That drawer will have 2 more packets in it tomorrow. You will take them without asking me about them." Ray picked up the packet. Pip sniffed it through his jacket and made her small beacon sound. Eula's expression didn't change, but something in it did. Very slightly. The way a wall looks after someone has moved a painting, the outline of something that used to be there. "Go," she said. He went. That night, reading in his bunk with Pip draped across his legs and Gerald on the windowsill, Ray thought about what the database had said. Not the legal parts. The other part. The part he kept coming back to. A hatchling who bonds has read the mind it chooses. Not completely, not every thought, but the emotional landscape. The fundamental character. Whether the person is safe. A Vorthan hatchling cannot bond incorrectly. It can only bond to what it genuinely finds. Ray had thought about that for 3 weeks. He was still thinking about it. He had never particularly thought of himself as the kind of person a creature would choose. He was quiet. He was careful. He went from posting to posting and maintained polite professional relationships and wrote reports that 6 people read. He did not have anyone he called first when something went wrong. He did not have anyone who called him first either, and he had gotten used to this the way you get used to an old injury, not painlessly, but without drama. Pip had followed him through a cargo bay, down 3 corridors, and refused every exit he offered her. He looked down at her. She was asleep. Her frills were fully relaxed, fanned out softly against his leg. She made a small sound in her sleep, the beacon sound, but quieter, like a signal that wasn't looking for anything because it had already found what it needed. Ray turned off his reading light. He lay in the dark for a while and thought about the fact that something, for the first time in a long time, had followed him home on purpose. He was still thinking about it when his comm unit chimed. A new arrival in the docking queue. Standard notification, Varda Station logged all incoming vessels. Ray almost ignored it. He almost rolled over and went to sleep. He didn't know why he reached for the unit and read the manifest. Vorthan diplomatic vessel. Registry, Dominion Fleet. Purpose of visit, recovery mission. Status, missing hatchling, categorized as defective. Last known location, Varda Sector Freight Lane. Ray read it twice. Then he set the comm unit face down on the shelf above his bunk. He breathed slowly and deliberately for a moment. Pip slept on his legs, warm and trusting. Defective, the manifest had said. That was their word for her. Defective. And then they had put her in a cargo shipment and filed her as missing. Ray stared at the ceiling for a long time. When he finally closed his eyes, his jaw was set in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with something much quieter. Something that had, apparently, been sitting in him for a while, waiting for a reason. It had one now. The Vorthan ship was called the Ardent Claim. Ray thought that was a very on-the-nose name for a vessel that had come to take something back. He watched it dock from the observation level, a long, dark ship, all smooth curves and no visible seams, the kind of design that said we did not build this to impress you and still managed to be impressive. It was 3 times the length of any freighter currently in port, and it moved with the quiet authority of something that had never been told no. Pip watched it too. She was on his shoulder, which was where she had been spending most of her time since she'd gotten too large for the jacket trick. She had grown noticeably in the past 3 weeks, still small, still hatchling-sized, but filling out in a way that spoke to adequate nutrition and, Ray suspected, simple contentment. Her frills were up, not spread wide, not alarmed, but up and still, watching the ship the way you watch something you recognize from a long way away. Ray put a hand up and she pressed the underside of her jaw against his fingers. He wasn't sure when he had started doing this automatically. He had stopped tracking it. The diplomatic party came through the docking gate at mid-station hour. Ray wasn't there for it. He'd gone back to his quarters, where Pip spent an unusual amount of time pressed against the viewport, scales faintly luminous in a way he hadn't seen before. When his comm chimed with a formal summons to the diplomatic wing, he wasn't surprised. He put Pip inside his jacket. She was past the point where this was comfortable for either of them, but she tolerated it, and walked to deck 2. Admiral Sara was already in the room. She was tall. That was the first thing. Vorthan adults were large beings to begin with, and Sara carried herself in a way that added something extra to every centimeter. Her scales were a deep, shifting bronze, not a single color, but many, changing as she moved, catching light at different angles. Her frills were fully elevated and perfectly rigid, a display of absolute controlled authority. She had 4 attendants arranged behind her and an aide at her right shoulder, younger, darker scaled, who watched everything in the room with careful, quiet eyes. She looked at Ray the way someone looks at a number that doesn't add up. Commander Eula stood to one side, doing an excellent impression of someone who was entirely neutral about all of this. "You are the human xenobiologist," Sara said. Her translator rendered her voice in flat, precise tones. "Ray Calloway." "Yes," Ray said. "You have had possession of a Vorthan hatchling for approximately 26 days. She came to me," Ray said. "I didn't go looking for her." Sara's frills moved, a small adjustment, the kind you'd miss if you weren't watching. "The distinction is irrelevant. The hatchling belongs to the Dominion. She will be returned to us now, and you will face no formal consequences, given the apparent accidental nature of your involvement." She paused. "This is a generous offer." Ray looked at her for a moment. There was no drama in his expression, no fear, no bluster. He looked at her the way he looked at Data, carefully, taking in what was there. "No," he said. The room was very quiet. Sarah's frills spread 1 centimeter wider. I do not think you understand the position you are in. I understand it, Ray said. I've read Article 7. I've also read the Vorthan Accord on Sacred Bond Protocol, specifically the section that says a completed psychic bond cannot be severed without damage to the hatchling's core cognition. I've read your own texts, Admiral. The ones your temples use. The ones that say the bond is the hatchling's voice, her only voice before she develops language, and that to deny the bond is to deny the hatchling herself. He kept his voice even. So when I say no, I'm not being stubborn. I'm using your own position against you. Another silence. Longer this time. Sarah looked at him with something that was not quite anger and not quite respect. Something that might have been, had she been a different person or he a different species, the beginning of interest. She is defective, Sarah said. A runt. Her cognitive resonance at hatching was below threshold. She was assessed by trained Vorthan handlers and found to be incapable of a stable bond. Pip, inside Ray's jacket, made a sound. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. Ray looked at Sarah steadily. Then how did she bond? No answer. She was in a cargo shipment, Ray said. Your manifest listed her as deceased. Someone put a living hatchling in a cargo bay and filed her as dead. He said it simply, without heat, because heat would have given Sarah something to deflect. The plain fact was harder to argue with. She found me in a cargo bay on this station, in the dark, injured, underweight. She read me. However that works for your species, and she chose. Your own texts say that choice cannot be wrong. So either she's not defective, or your threshold assessment is. He paused. Either way, I'm not giving her to the people who left her to die in a shipping container. The aide behind Sarah, Drav, Ray would learn his name later, was completely motionless. He was not looking at Sarah. He was looking at Ray with an expression that Ray could not read, but that felt like someone doing arithmetic very quickly. Sarah did not speak for a long moment. You are one human biologist, she said finally. On a small station. You have no legal standing before the Galactic Compact on this matter, no representation, no precedent in your favor. I have 72 hours to find some, Ray said. That's what Article 7 allows before a formal diplomatic demand is filed. So I'll take those 72 hours, if it's all the same to you. Ray said that was fair. He thanked her for her time. He left. In the corridor, he exhaled once, slow and quiet, and put his hand to his jacket. Pip pressed against it from the inside. He took the long way back to his quarters. On the way, he passed the station archive room, a small space on Deck 4 where the research terminals had access to the Galactic Legal Database. He had walked past it 100 times without going in. He went in now. He sat down at the nearest terminal. He pulled up the search function. He typed, Vorthan Hatchling Bond, Multi-Species Legal Precedent, Severance, Galactic Compact. The results came back. There were more of them than he had expected. He started at the top. By the time station lights dimmed to their night cycle, he had filled 6 pages of notes and drunk 3 cups of water from the dispenser in the corner. His handwriting got smaller as the hours passed, which was something that happened when he was concentrating very hard and had stopped thinking about anything other than the problem in front of him. Pip had found her way out of his jacket at some point and was now curled in his lap, asleep, making her small repeating sound. Her warmth sat against him like ballast. Ray turned a page and started another line of notes. He had 68 hours left. He intended to use all of them. 47 pages. Eula was looking at the document on her desk at what the station clock insisted was 11 at night, though she had long since stopped attaching meaning to that number. She had a glass of water she hadn't touched. She had a duty report she hadn't finished. She had, sitting in her inbox since approximately 2 hours ago, a 47-page legal brief from a human xenobiologist who had apparently spent the last 2 days doing nothing but reading. She read the cover note first. Commander Eula, I am aware this is not your problem. I am sending it to you anyway because you are the only person on this station with the authority to forward it to the human embassy with a station endorsement, and a station endorsement will make it harder to dismiss. I will not ask you to agree with me. I am only asking you to read it. Ray Calloway. Eula set the note aside. She opened the document. An hour later, she reached the end of it. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the ceiling for a while. Then she looked at the document again, turned to page 12, read a particular passage twice, and made a small sound that was, for Thalvin, the equivalent of a long, involuntary exhale. The brief was not written like a legal argument. It was written like a research paper, citations in a consistent format, conclusions drawn only from evidence presented, no emotional language, no appeals to sentiment. It laid out, in methodical order, every piece of Vorthan law and galactic compact statute that touched on psychic bonds, hatchling rights, species autonomy, and the legal status of a non-Vorthan guardian in a completed bond scenario. It found 12 precedents. 4 of them were from Vorthan sources. 3 of those 4 explicitly supported the position that a completed bond was the hatchling's legal voice, and that denying the bond was legally equivalent to denying the hatchling standing. It was, Eula thought, quite good. She did not want to forward it to the human embassy. She had been a station commander for 9 years. She had a working relationship with the Vorthan Dominion, 3 ongoing joint research agreements, and no interest in being the station that started a diplomatic incident over a runt hatchling and a quiet biologist. She opened the document one more time. She reread page 31, which dealt with the specific case law around hatchlings who had bonded outside the Dominion's care. There were 4 historical cases. In 3 of them, the hatchling had died after the bond was severed. The 4th had experienced severe cognitive disruption that the Vorthan scholars who documented it had described, in their own words, as a wound that did not heal. Eula sat with this for a moment. She thought about the hatchling she had told herself she had not seen. The one with amber eyes and folded frills. The one who had been listed on a Dominion manifest as defective and deceased. She thought about that word, defective, applied to a living creature that had survived a cargo bay and a strange station and 3 weeks of an inadequate diet and still, according to everything the brief said, bonded cleanly and completely. Eula picked up her stylus. She wrote a short cover memo, neutral, factual, containing no opinion of her own. She attached it to Ray's document. She forwarded the package to the Human Embassy's duty officer on Compact Station 9. She told herself this was about station stability. She told herself that a prolonged diplomatic standoff was worse for the station than a preemptive legal filing. Both of these things were true. She went with them. She did not think about the hatchling. She went to bed. Ray did not sleep. He had 30 hours left and a gap in his argument that he couldn't fill. The Vorthan bond law was clear enough. The hatchling rights statutes were solid. But there was a piece missing, something about cognitive resonance assessments, about who had the authority to declare a bond complete and valid, about whether a Dominion handler's pre-hatching evaluation could be legally used to invalidate a post-hatching bond event. He needed a ruling, something that had actually been decided by an actual court or council, not just implied in a text. He had searched the Galactic Archive for 6 hours and found nothing. He was on his 3rd cup of water, and his eyes were doing the particular dry, gritty thing they did after too many hours on a screen. Pip was somewhere behind him. He could hear her moving around, the small sounds she made when she was awake and alert. Sometimes she came and pressed against his leg when he had been still too long. He had started to look forward to this without examining it. He heard the archive room door open. He didn't turn around. He assumed it was maintenance. But no tools started, no panels opened. Instead, quiet footsteps crossed the room, and someone sat down at the Terminal 2 stations over. He turned. The aide, Drav, the young Vorthan soldier from Sara's delegation, dark-scaled, who had stood behind his admiral through the entire confrontation on Deck 2 without saying a word. He was not in uniform now. He wore a plain dark oversuit, the kind that read as off-duty. He had the slightly too careful posture of someone who had decided, very deliberately, to be here. He said nothing to Ray. He pulled up the Galactic Archive search function. He started typing. Ray watched him for a moment, then turned back to his own terminal. They worked in silence. The station hummed around them. Pip made her small sound from somewhere in the corner. Ray heard Drav's breath change slightly, the small sharp intake of someone who has found something they were looking for. Paper printed from the terminal across the room. Old-fashioned, physical paper. The archive terminals still had printers because some species found digital record transfers unreliable. Ray heard it come out of the machine. Drav crossed the room. He placed the paper on Ray's desk. He did not make eye contact. He walked out of the archive room, and the door slid, closed behind him. Ray picked up the paper. It was a Vorthan High Council ruling from approximately 180 years ago. The case involved a hatchling who had bonded during a refugee transit, Conditions of duress. No Vorthan handlers present. The bond formed with a non-Vorthan aid worker. The Dominion had tried to void the bond on the grounds of cognitive assessment failure. The High Council had ruled against them. The ruling stated, in plain terms, that a bond completed under clear psychic volition, meaning the hatchling was aware, uncoerced, and not in cognitive distress at the moment of bonding, was valid regardless of any prior assessment, and that no prior assessment could retroactively invalidate a completed bond event. Ray sat very still for a moment. This was the piece he had been missing. This was the gap filled in. He looked at the door Drav had walked out of. He looked at the ruling in his hands. He thought about a young Vorthan soldier sitting down at a terminal in a station archive room in the middle of the night, off duty, saying nothing, printing a piece of paper and putting it on a stranger's desk. He didn't know what to do with that. He filed it away, the way he filed things that mattered and needed more time to understand. He turned back to his terminal. He opened the brief. He began to add the ruling to page 39, carefully, the way you place the last piece of something you've been building for a long time. He had 29 hours left. He didn't need all of them. By hour 69, the brief was complete. 51 pages now, with the new precedent incorporated in a final section that Ray had written last, in plain language. No citations, no legal terminology. It said, I am not asking this chamber to rule in my favor because I am sympathetic. I am asking it to rule in my favor because the evidence supports it. The bond is the hatchling's voice. The hatchling has spoken. The only question is whether this chamber is willing to listen. He sent the final version to Eula's office at hour 70. He received, within 20 minutes, a forwarding notification. She had sent it to the embassy again, this time to the senior diplomatic officer, not the duty desk, with a stronger memo attached. Ray read the notification. He read it again. Then he put on his jacket, collected Pip from the corner where she had fallen asleep on his equipment bag, and sat in the quiet of the archive room for the last hour. He was ready. Deck 2's diplomatic chamber was a room that had been designed to make everyone in it feel the weight of what was being decided. It had high ceilings. It had 2 long tables facing each other across a central floor. It had lighting that was neither warm nor cold, just present and even, falling on everything without mercy. The walls carried the seals of every compact species with a station presence, 17 of them, arranged without hierarchy, which was itself a diplomatic statement that had taken 3 years to agree on. Ray had been in this room once before, 8 months ago, for a routine research permit review. He had thought, at the time, that the room was too large for what it was used for. He did not think that now. The Vorthan delegation sat at one table, Admiral Sara in the center, rigid and precise, her bronze scales catching the overhead light, Drav at her right shoulder. For other attendants ranged behind them, all in formal Dominion colors. A human embassy observer had arrived by fast transit overnight. A small, alert woman named Priya who had read the brief on the way and asked Ray exactly 4 sharp questions when they met in the corridor outside. She sat to his left now, with a secondary document she had drafted herself attached to his filing. Eula sat at the head of the room in the station commander's chair, neutral ground. Technically, her presence required as host. She looked at nothing in particular with the carefully blank expression of someone who was going to let this play out. Ray sat at the second table. Pip was inside his jacket. A compact mediator, an elderly Urani named Ossel who apparently handled bond dispute cases specifically, sat at a small table between the 2 main ones. He had the weary patience of someone who had seen a version of this argument before and was waiting to see which version this one was. The human has filed under compact mediation protocol, Ossel said. Both parties have agreed to hear the filing before any diplomatic demand is formalized. We proceed. Ray stood. He had prepared for this the way he prepared for a field survey, methodically, without drama, knowing every step before he took it. He did not have the natural ease of a lawyer or a diplomat. He was a biologist who had spent 69 hours in an archive room. He looked like both of these things. He did not try to look like anything else. He walked through the brief, section by section. He started with the bond itself, what it was, biologically and psychically, what the Vorthan's own text said about it, how it worked in a hatchling who had never received handler's guidance. He explained, in plain terms, what it meant that Pip had bonded in a cargo bay, alone, With no Vorthen present, under no coercion, after what appeared to be 3 days of proximity to a single human. He noted the pre-hatching assessment and the word defective, and he let it sit in the room for a moment without commenting on it. Then he presented the 12 legal precedents. One by one, he gave the case name, the ruling body, the date, the outcome, and the specific clause that applied to the current situation. He did not editorialize. He let the cases speak. When he reached the High Council ruling from 180 years ago, the one Drav had found, he placed the physical paper on the center floor so that Ossel could see it. He read the key passage aloud. He noted, once, that this was a Vorthen ruling from a Vorthen body, and that the current Dominion position was, therefore, in direct conflict with its own High Council's precedent. Sara was very still throughout. She was a controlled being. Her frills did not move. But Ray, who had gotten careful about watching frills in the past month, noticed the fine muscles at their base tighten by a small, involuntary degree when he read the precedent. He finished. He sat down. Sara rose. Her counter was what Ray had expected and prepared for. She argued cultural sovereignty, the right of the Vorthen Dominion to govern its own bonding customs without outside interference. She argued that Ray, as a non-Vorthen, could not provide what a Vorthen guardian provided: psychic resonance, lifespan compatibility, species-appropriate development, community integration. She noted that Vorthen lived for centuries, and that Ray would age and die long before Pip reached full maturity, which would leave the hatchling without a guardian during a critical developmental period. These were not bad arguments. Ray had known they weren't bad arguments. He had spent 16 of his 69 hours preparing for them specifically. He stood again when Sara finished. He acknowledged every point, directly, without deflection. He said, "I know I cannot provide psychic resonance. That is correct. I said the same in Section 9 of my brief, where I also noted that the Vorthen's own literature describes bonds with low-resonance guardians as rare, but documented, and that in such cases the hatchling develops compensatory communication abilities over time." He said, "I know I will not outlive her." I said that in Section 11, where I also cited the 3 cases in which bonded pairs of mismatched lifespans were legally recognized under compact law, with provisions made for successor guardianship when the shorter-lived partner died naturally. He said, "I know I cannot give her everything a Vorthen guardian could." He paused there, not for effect, just because the next part needed to be said simply, without any decoration around it. "She didn't choose a Vorthen guardian," he said. "She chose me. She was in a cargo bay, in the dark, for 3 days, and she read whatever she reads, and she chose me. Your own sacred texts say the bond cannot be wrong. Your own High Council ruled that no prior assessment can override a completed bond event. So I would like someone in this chamber to explain, using your own law and your own precedent, why her choice counts for less than yours." Nobody spoke. Ossel looked at his documents. Sara looked at Ray with that expression again, the one that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite respect. And then Pip moved. She had been still and quiet through the entire proceeding, pressed against Ray's ribs, her frills flat. Now she pushed out from the top of his jacket and climbed to his shoulder in 3 quick movements. She was larger than she'd been a month ago. She didn't fit invisibly anymore, not anywhere. On his shoulder, she was plainly visible to the entire chamber. She looked at the Vorthen delegation. Her frills rose, fully, slowly, fanning to their widest point. Not the display of a frightened animal. The display of a creature that was entirely aware of where it was and had decided, deliberately, to be seen. She looked at Sara. Sara looked at her. Something passed between them that Ray couldn't follow, some frequency below his range. He watched Sara's frills, so carefully controlled all morning, shift through 3 colors in less than 2 seconds. Then Pip turned her head. She pressed the underside of her jaw against Ray's cheek. It was a slow, deliberate movement. A claim. The Vorthen gesture for it was in the texts Ray had read. He recognized it. My place. My person. Mine. The chamber was silent. Behind Sara, Drav bowed his head. Not to the Admiral. Not to the Mediator. To Pip. Ossel set down his stylus. "I will defer the formal ruling for review," he said carefully. "However, given the High Council precedent and the bond event as witnessed, I am not in a position to authorize immediate transfer of the hatchling." She remains in current custody, pending review. Sarah said nothing for a long moment. Then she rose, and her delegation rose with her. At the door, she stopped. She turned. She looked at Ray. She said something in her own language, not through the translator, raw Vorthen, which sounded like deep resonance and shaped air. Drav translated it that evening, in a message he sent from his personal comm unit to Ray's. The message said, she said, the bond holds. The human knows what he is. We will see what he does with it. Drav added nothing to the message. He didn't need to. Ray sat alone in the diplomatic chamber for a few minutes after everyone had left. Pip sat on the table in front of him, frills relaxed now, watching his face with her amber eyes. Good job, he told her. She made the beacon sound. Short, clear, repeating. Ray put her on his shoulder and walked back to his quarters. Gerald was still alive on the windowsill. The stars were moving outside. The station went about its business, completely unaware that one quiet, unremarkable human had just made the galaxy move around him by the simple method of refusing to move himself. Ray made a cup of water. The heating coil still wasn't fixed and stood at the viewport. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like anything much. He felt like himself, which was, he supposed, exactly what Pip had read and chosen. Maybe that was enough. He thought it probably was. 3 years passed the way they do when you are not watching for them. Not fast, not slow. Just steadily, the way a tide moves, without announcing itself, and only noticeable when you look at where you were standing before and see how far the water has come. Gerald the houseplant had been repotted twice. He was on his third pot now, a larger clay one that Eula had produced from somewhere without explanation and left outside Ray's door with a note that said only, this size. He had grown into it. He looked healthy, which Ray found quietly satisfying in a way he had never examined. Pip had grown into everything. She was not hatchling-sized anymore. She had not been hatchling-sized for over 2 years. She was currently about the length of a large dog and considerably more substantial. Wings, properly scaled now, folded in complicated geometries against her back when she wasn't using them. Her frills, which had once trembled with fear in a dark cargo bay, spread to nearly half a meter fully extended and carried colors Ray was still learning to read. She could not fit inside a jacket. She could not fit in a gear locker. She could sit on his shoulder if he braced, which he did, because she had not stopped doing this and he had not asked her to. She went with him everywhere. This was no longer a secret or a problem. It was simply a fact of Varda Station, logged in the station manifest under a new category that hadn't existed before: registered xenobiological companion, multi-species bond recognition, provisional compact accreditation pending full ruling review. The full ruling had come back 14 months after the hearing. Ray had read it on a Thursday, a real Thursday this time, or close enough, sitting in the archive room where he had once spent 69 sleepless hours building a case out of borrowed law and one piece of paper left by a Vorthen soldier. The ruling was 22 pages. It upheld the bond. It created a new legal framework for non-Vorthen guardians in completed bond situations. It cited Ray's brief 4 times by name, not his name, his filing number, which was how these things worked, and the 180-year-old High Council precedent 7 times. It had required input from 3 different compact councils and taken 14 months to write. It was, as legal documents went, unremarkable in its language and enormous in its implications. Ray had read it once, start to finish, then set it down and gone to find Pip, who was in the research bay investigating a sample container she had no business investigating. He'd told her the ruling had come through. She'd looked at him. He'd said, out loud, in the empty research bay, that they were fine, that it was over, that nobody was taking her anywhere. Pip had made her sound, the beacon sound, short and clear, and then gone back to investigating the sample container. Ray had stood there for a while, feeling something he didn't have precise language for. Something that was part relief and part something older, something that had been sitting in him since the first night he'd lain in the dark and understood that she had chosen him. Not because he was exceptional, not because he was brave or powerful or any of the things that usually won in stories. Because she had read him, in the dark, injured and alone, and decided he was safe. He had spent 3 years trying to be worth that assessment. He wasn't sure he'd managed it, but he had shown up every day, which was, he thought, most of what she had been looking for. The multi-species bond accords that followed the ruling were partly Ray's doing, or partly the doing of the 51-page document he'd written in a 69-hour stretch, which had become a reference filing in the compact legal archive. He had been consulted twice during the drafting process by a committee he'd never expected to hear from. The resulting accords created provisions for successor guardianship, species-appropriate development support from the guardian species, and a formal acknowledgement that a completed psychic bond was a legal fact regardless of the biological origins of either party. He had not attended the signing. He had been in the outer biodome, collecting samples. Drav wrote to him every month. The letters were formal in structure and personal in content, a combination that suited both of them. Drav had moved into the diplomatic corps now, working specifically on multi-species rights cases. He never mentioned, directly, the night in the archive room. Neither did Ray. Some things didn't need to be said to be understood. Eula had been promoted to senior station director and now oversaw 3 research outposts in the sector. She visited Varda twice a year on inspection rounds. Each time, she found a reason to come by Ray's quarters. Each time, she looked at Pip with an expression she kept carefully neutral. Pip always looked back at her with the same calm, assessing amber gaze, and sometimes, not always, made a specific low sound that Ray had eventually concluded was what Pip did when she had decided she liked someone. Eula received this information without comment. She kept visiting. The Vorthan Cultural Historian's paper had arrived in Ray's inbox about a year after the ruling, forwarded without comment from the human embassy. The paper was titled On Anomalous Bonding Events and the Persistence of Non-Vorthan Guardians in Contemporary Bond Cases. It was a dry, academic document for most of its length, and then, in the final 2 paragraphs, it said something that Ray had read 4 times before putting his terminal face down on the desk. It said, "What is perhaps most instructive about the Callaway Vorthan bond case is not the legal outcome, nor the precedent established. It is the behavior of the human guardian throughout. The literature on non-Vorthan guardians in historical bond cases focuses, typically, on their eventual failure, on the inability of a shorter-lived, lower resonance being to adequately protect a Vorthan hatchling in the long term. The Callaway case suggests we have perhaps been asking the wrong question. Not whether a non-Vorthan can survive the responsibilities of guardianship, but whether they can, in some cases, embody something that functions as an adequate substitute for what we consider primary. The hatchling known as Pip shows no signs of developmental disruption. She shows, if anything, signs of an unusual stability. We leave it to future researchers to explain why." Ray had read that 4 times. Then he had gotten up and gone to the research bay, where Pip was investigating things she had no business investigating, and he had sat on the floor next to her until she climbed into his lap. All of her. Far too large for it now. An engineering problem they both ignored, and put her head under his chin. He had not explained it to her. She already knew. The night Sarah came back was a quiet one. Ray was returning from a late supply pickup when he saw her in the docking corridor. 3 years had not changed her. She was still tall, still controlled, still wearing her frills at the precise height that communicated authority without aggression. Her delegation was smaller this time. 2 attendants, no aide. Drav was not with her. Pip was with Ray. She was always with Ray. The corridor was otherwise empty. There was a moment when all 4 of them were simply there. 2 humans, 1 Vorthan admiral, 1 very large young dragon, who was technically still a hatchling by Vorthan lifespan standards and would be for another 30 years. Pip looked at Sarah. Something happened between them in the silence, something Ray couldn't hear, in frequencies he didn't have. He watched Sarah's frills shift through 2 colors slowly. He watched Pip's frills rise and then settle, not in a display of claim, not in a challenge, but in something else. Something that looked, to his now practiced eye, like acknowledgement. Sarah inclined her head, not to Ray, to Pip. A full, deliberate inclination, the Vorthan gesture of recognized kinship. Not family, not subordinate. Kin. Pip dipped her frills in return. She made no sound. Sarah walked past them and continued down the corridor. Her attendants followed. She did not look back. Ray stood in the corridor for a moment. He didn't ask Pip about it. Some conversations happened at frequencies he wasn't built for, and that was all right. He had learned to be at peace with the parts of her he couldn't understand, the same way he trusted she had learned to be at peace with the parts of him she couldn't share. That was, he thought, simply what it meant to choose someone and mean it. He walked back to his quarters. Pip walked beside him, her shoulder at his hip, her tail moving in the relaxed, unhurried sweep that meant she was content. The stars were in the viewport. Gerald was on the sill. The station was busy and noisy and full of lives going somewhere, ships leaving for everywhere, the whole galaxy in its usual state of motion and urgency. Ray sat down at his desk. He had a field report due. He had samples to log. He had, as always, work that 6 people would eventually read, and that was his to do regardless. He opened his terminal. Pip stretched out across the back of his chair, one wing hanging loose, her chin resting near his shoulder. She made her sound, the small, clear, repeating pulse that had once sounded like a distress signal and now sounded like nothing else in the world to him. Not distress, not searching. Found. He wrote his report. The stars moved. The station hummed. Outside the viewport, things were leaving. Ray stayed. He was already home.